Hello, I'm Paul Peterson. I'm the editor-in-chief of Education Next, and I have with me today our research editor, Martin West, who is a professor at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, and he has written a research piece for Education Next, and in that piece, he looks at whether or not parents can rate their own school accurately. So, Marty, in the conventional wisdom, people give their local school a better grade than they give schools across the country. And did you find that here?
That's certainly been the case. That's something that Phi Delta Kappa has found for many years. It's something that we found in our survey in the past and this year as well. It's something that political scientists find when they ask people about their own representative in Congress.
So do people really know what they're talking about when they rate their local school?
What was interesting about what we tried to do in this research is try and say, do people actually have information that they're drawing on when they're evaluating their schools, or are they just sort of operating on a general sense? So what we did was first of all, we were able to link individual respondents to specific local schools because we had information on the addresses of those who were completing our survey before the survey was administered.
So how did you do that?
Well, we could get the latitude and longitude coordinates of the addresses and then link those up with the latitude and longitude coordinates of every public school in the United States. And so we could give the respondent a list of the 5 closest elementary schools, the 5 closest middle schools, and high schools in their district and say, which one do you consider to be your local school?
So when you ask them a question, you are asking them about a particular school that you know yourself know something about.
That's right. So they've identified a specific school. We then ask them to rate that school on a standard A
what do you know about that school?
grade. And then what we do is we link up their ratings with information on academic achievement in those schools. Thanks to No Child Left Behind, we know the rate at which students are achieving proficiency on math and reading tests for every public school essentially in the United States. So we can look to see whether their subjective ratings of the quality of the school actually correspond to objective data on the performance of students.
People tell me that parents go by the kinds of kids that go to the school, not really the quality of the school itself.
Certainly. And so in addition to gathering performance data on the schools, we also gather data on the demographic composition of the student body, so the racial and ethnic mix of the students as well as the percentage who are of low income. And also on the school size and also the class size. So those are all essentially control variables, but we're also interested in how
those things are. So do people like smaller classes?
It turns out that they don't. If anything, the relationship goes in the other way, that schools with larger classes receive slightly larger grades, and it may be that those are the schools, the slightly higher grades, and maybe that those are the schools that are attracting families to the neighborhood.
Well, do they like schools where the kids are of a different race than their own?
So if you look at that variable on its own, its relation to ratings, then yes. More African American or more Hispanic students is associated with lower ratings. But if you take into account the performance of students at the school, that relationship goes away altogether. So generally speaking,
people are not rating schools on the basis of how many minority kids are at that school.
It doesn't look like it. But we do find that even once you control for performance, there is a relationship between the percent of kids who are poor in the school and citizen ratings. And essentially, the percent poor and the percent who are proficient have about the same relationship with ratings. So a 20 percentage point increase in the share of students who are proficient or a decrease in the share who are poor gives you about 15% of a letter grade.
So in other words, you get a higher score from the parents if you got a higher score on your test scores that the state reports out.
Yeah, well, actually, you mentioned something there. You said parents. So first we look for citizens as a whole, and we find a fairly modest relationship. But then we look separately at parents, and we do find that the parents are much more responsive to the performance differences.
So parents know more than the typical citizen. Right. I always thought it was the homeowner who knew more.
No, well, we look at the same question for homeowners, and we actually don't find that homeowners are any more responsive to differences.
Homeowners are not as smart as we all thought they were, and parents are smarter.
Parents are really smart. Parents know best. That's what my parents told me, and we find some evidence consistent with that here. The last thing we did, in general, I think our findings are fairly optimistic as to the degree to which parents can recognize a good school when they see one and make good decisions about their child's education. There are a couple of caveats. One is that we're looking at the relationship between student achievement levels and ratings, not necessarily the amount that students are learning at the school. right? Levels can be affected not just by the quality of the school, but by all sorts of factors outside of the school. In Florida, where we had an oversample of residents there, we're able to look separately at the level of student achievement and the amount students are actually learning. And we find that people are more responsive to the level.
So in other words, when they look at a school, they see, okay, are the students at this school, for whatever reason, performing at a high level?
That's right.
We don't care what the reason is. We just want to know if it's at a high level.
That's right. That seems to be what they're responding to. And the other caveat is that they seem to be responsive to differences in performance within their own state, not the performance of the state as a whole relative to other states in the nation. So because states have their own tests and they set their own cut scores for proficiency, we actually have to restrict our comparisons to people in the same state. When we bring into the analysis the performance of the state as a whole on the National Assessment of Educational Progress, that doesn't seem to predict citizen ratings.
So in other words, people are comparing their local school to other local schools. You're not getting the people in Texas comparing their schools to those in Massachusetts.
That's right. The Massachusetts parents, just because Massachusetts schools perform very high relative to the nation as a whole, aren't rating their schools any better than our Mississippi parents. Where,
so should we have national standards so everybody could rate their school against every other school in the nation?
Well, I think a stronger case can be made for national cut scores, certainly to sort of make the proficiency cutoffs more comparable from state to state.
So maybe this is
data. Arnie Duncan says that the states are lying to the parents. Our data suggests that the parents are to some extent believing the states when they're lying to them. Now, of course, we don't know what changing the reported proficiency rates would actually do. It could be that parents would continue to base their comparisons locally on the available options.
So have you solved the problem that we began with here, that people rate their local schools better than national schools? Are they doing that because they really can't rate their local schools relative to the nation as a whole?
It's an interesting possibility. Not one we discuss in the paper, but one maybe we should follow up on.
Thank you, Marty. Great conversation.